I have a thing for old rivers with old names. I also have a thing for the ancient world, its monuments, its rituals and its political and economic systems. These things coalesce around the Avebury area, which is rich in ancient monuments and also rich in old rivers with old names. If we accept that Avebury and Stonehenge are places of pilgrimage, and the Amesbury archer suggests that he was born in probably Switzerland and was buried a mile from Stonehenge, then we can ask ourselves what route did the Bronze Age pilgrim take to get from Europe to these monuments. The Salisbury Avon is the natural choice. They needed boat skills to get to Britain in the first place, so proceeding by boat would be a good bet. Even if they didn't go by boat, it would still have been useful to follow the river, though not in the winter months, the meadows would have been quite wet. Reaching Salisbury, which by at least the Roman period was called Sorweodunum, more on that later, we would be instructed or have guides to lead us on towards Stonehenge along the middle of the three rivers and still our Avon. We come to Amesbury and the ancient henges of Durrington Walls and Stonehenge, and I'm sure feasting and religious activity took place. But once that is done and you haven't finished with your trip to Britain, how do you get to your next stop, Avebury Stone Circle to the north? Well, conveniently the Avon continues north but splits at Up Avon into two branches, neither of which goes directly north. Incidentally, it seems to me you could canoe as far as Up Avon, but not very much further in either direction. Nonetheless, we are in a time before writing and therefore signposts, and your dialect of the language would be likely gibberish to the locals. It would be wise to take one or other of the river banks, east or west, even though your destination is to the north. This is so that you don't get lost. One decider would be the Neolithic henge monument at Marden, just a couple of miles to the west, along the western branch of the Avon. There is a ford at Wiltshire, which in Saxon times meant Weevil's Ford. Not far from there are 16 round barrows, now completely ploughed out, but appear as crop marks in Air Force photos from the 40s. The Saxon Charter of North Newnton talks of a sand barrow somewhere near here. You won't find many round barrows on lowland, but you do find them. There is also the Frith Hera path here, which is at least a Saxon road. So following the river, you would have been greeted with a large barrow cemetery, perhaps built in living memory, and then passing those, you quickly come to the large banks of the Marden Henge, one of the least known of the henges. Having taken part in whatever ceremonies were on offer, you look to the north in Avebury. There are several good paths that lead there, but the best perhaps go through Alton Priors. If we had chosen to miss out Marden Henge, we could have carried straight on to North Newnton, where another stream leads to Alton and ultimately Avebury. This is the Bottle Stream, or Botan Well. Its source is at Alton, where in its charter, Sawyer number 1513, it talks of Awila, which means first spring. Notes that the Thames has an Awila at its end, at its source. Perhaps these are significant names. But going around the boundary of Alton in the charter, it comes to Erwell Forada, which is probably here in the aptly named Ford Wood. This is a likely projection for the Ridgeway and shows where it crosses the stream. I was sure I understood how our forefathers got to Avebury from the continent, and now I'm not as sure as I was. I don't think an eager pilgrim would have missed Marden Henge, yet it looks more convenient or straightforward to go along the Bottle Stream. Ah well. Arrest be on Averni Staffa on Stinters forward. And that means first by the Avon. on the bank of on the bank at Stinters Ford, and I think that was the bridge where we crossed at Woodbridge. Or Grundy thinks that anyway. So it what that tells us. Well, there's a word I've never heard before in topographical Anglo-Saxon descriptions. That's statha, and I had to look it up. It means bank. Also, Stinters Ford might be. It's probably a name because the es part is genitive, but it could also mean the modern word stint, to hold back. If you're stinting on your dues, you're not paying your way. But most important of all, it tells us that this headwater was called the Avon 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago. So there's a couple of headwaters. There's more than one headwater to the Avon. The Avon that goes through Salisbury. And you might think to yourself, well, which one's the real Avon? Well, we know this one isn't a fake Avon, at least. It is definitely an Avon. There's another one further on which leads to Marden, and those of us who are prehistoric watchers of the landscape like to think about the relationship, the pathway up from the south coast for those Bronze Age pilgrims coming to see Avebury and Stonehenge. And they've seen Stonehenge, they come up the Avon, and then there's the Marden. Then there's Marden, which is a henge monument, and then there's so the Avon, one of the Avon headwaters, not this one, takes you to that, and then it's across land up to Avebury. That would join up the dots. That would be a very convenient explanation for how to put ourselves in the shoes of those pilgrims from the continent. We know that we're pilgrims from the continent because we've dug up their bones in near Stonehenge at Amesbury, and one of the people there definitely came from Europe, came from probably Switzerland or something like that. But this river wasn't necessarily always called the Avon. Avon just means in Welsh river. It doesn't mean anything more than that. So we have Salisbury itself, very important, always has been a very important settlement. And in the Roman times that was called Sorvio Dunum, probably more like Sorvio Dunum, which helps us understand how Sorvio Dunum is quite easy to make the leap between Sorvio and Sals. So that's. But what does Sorvio mean? There's one theory which is quite tentative, but I don't have an academic reputation to lose. And that is Sorvios in Old Irish, means gentle, and it is a gentle river, very nice gurgling one. So that could be the name, that could be the original Iron Age name for this river. It's tentative, but it's another piece of information for you if you are joining the dots. You're piecing together that jigsaw of this quite sacred landscape south of Avebury,